Fantastic. Our next speaker is Lydia Chatziioannou. Lydia is an engineering manager specializing in in entertainment technology, backed up by some impressive experience at Sky, Now TV, Peacock, and most recently, Netflix, where she led engineering teams focused on operational excellence and user experience. Passionate about developing high-performing teams with a strong emphasis on leadership, strategy, and building trust between users and the products they deliver. Today, Lydia will be taking us through operational excellence for high-performing engineering teams. So I'm very happy with us. We've had Disney, and now we have Netflix, so we're getting some real big players that deal with billions of users.
I mean, wow, Netflix and Disney will have a unique opportunity to see two different perspectives from two very big players on the market.
And I can say as a marketing person, it's not just normal market stuff. These are the actual people who are behind the work. They are leading the teams. They are working on the actual infrastructure that billions of people use globally. These aren't region locked, they're not European, they're American. These are global apps. So I'm very happy to introduce today Lydia. Thank you for joining us.
Hello, Lydia.
Hi, everybody. Super exciting to be here. And this is a topic that I'm very passionate about. So yeah, can't wait.
Fantastic.
Yeah. So like today, I'll be covering the topic of operational excellence and what it means for engineering teams, especially the high-performing ones, and also how it can affect your business. I'll also go through a couple of ideas as to how you can get started, if this is, especially if you're like in a more startup environment, things to be mindful of, and basically highlight how this can be a bit of a game changer for like the end product. And I'll have some time in the end for questions. I'll try to go through the slides like relatively quickly, so nobody gets bored. Okay, so first of all, just a very quick intro. Honestly, you did the heavy lifting, so thanks for that. But yeah, I've been at Netflix for the past 2 years, and I was very heavily involved in a lot of topics around operational excellence, like, the quality of the product that we put out there, like things around like our own call and support processes. And I also drove a lot of initiatives on the tech health side to make sure that, again, what we deliver to the end user is, the best possible product. So a couple of things I'll cover today will be based on my learnings and things that I've implemented in my teams, even before Netflix. But before we start, I kind of want everybody to think about what is the first thing that comes to your mind when we talk about operational excellence. Because for me, and maybe because of my background, I think of like high quality streaming. Like for example, with Spotify, you play song after song without pause. With Netflix, like the volume of content, but also the streaming quality is amazing. And so both of those are like really great examples of high quality products that are worth our money. And this is why they're so successful. So automatically, I assume that to be this excellent, there are also excellent processes in place to make them happen. So why do we need operational excellence, and what is it? Now, if you ask anybody in tech or ChatGPT, because I tried that just to see what would come out of it, it will probably tell you it's about customer satisfaction, hence keeping people happy. It's about being efficient, reducing costs, and delivering value to the business. And to be honest, like to me, all of that sounds like very fancy, like jargon, things you hear from like CEOs and CDOs and, in podcasts and presentations. But at the end of the day, though, there's only one reason why we need operational excellence, and that is to remain competitive in the market. So it's extremely important to understand what the product you look after is, who the users are, what is its place in the market, and what it caters to. Because without being competitive, you lose the business. And that's why you need to ensure that what you have to offer is valuable, excellent, if not perfect. And that's where the excellence comes in. So let's talk a little bit at high level about how we define what operational excellence means to us. You first need to understand why you exist. For example, let's say you're building an application to track fitness levels. Like, what are you trying to achieve? Are you trying to be the best product on the market and offer the best premium user experience? Or are you trying to be the cheapest option available because, everything else on the market is too expensive and you have identified a need or a space, which allows you to be a little bit more scrappy yet cheap. And that's also completely fine. So once you have that vision and that strategy for the product that you own, you have to think about all the principles you need to establish in the team to make that happen. So if we go with that example of this like cheap application to track fitness levels, maybe you care about a culture of speed and scrappiness that also enables a bit of innovation. So, for example, that can be part of your operational excellence and what it means to your team, that speed and innovation, that comes from that scrappiness. And then you have to think about what processes do you have to establish to ensure that the team is set up for success based on those principles and that vision. But most importantly, what does operational excellence means for engineering teams? I find that this statement is the most accurate I've ever come across. I actually stole this from a colleague from a different presentation. But it's always about looking for opportunities to prioritize what is best for users by evaluating whether the impact of what you're doing is worth the money and the time it takes. So yeah, I'm just gonna give it like 5 more seconds for people to read through this because this is like what this presentation is based on. But yeah. It's also important to understand why operational excellence doesn't happen overnight. I think anybody who is in engineering is aware of this. Like we often have trouble communicating it to stakeholders, but the truth is that it takes time to happen. It can't be something that we achieve overnight. It's a continuous improvement process. And a lot of the time, the steps that we need to make that happen are not things that are understood by the rest of the business, especially from a technical perspective. But I'll get to that as well. So a good starting point to understand what steps you have to take is to ask your team a few simple questions, because at the end of the day, they are the ones on the ground making things happen. There's no one better. And then from there, you can start putting together a plan with objectives as to how to achieve operational excellence. So, for example, what are the reflections from user feedback or even the team's feedback? Where do we see the gap or what is missing for us to be comfortable enough to scale? So maybe the engineers think that there's not a lot of testing, and that's why we often don't catch issues on time with our product, or maybe we need to allocate more capacity to increase that test coverage so that we can get a step closer to operational excellence. But yeah, like your team is going to know what is missing, like better than anybody else. So what do we need or what do we want to deliver consistently to achieve strong execution? How do we expect the team to behave? Do we expect them to be scrappy and push out features fast, or to be super careful with the code they deploy because we can't really afford to provide something that's non-usable or like not quality enough? And because of that, what's the mindset they should have? Is it okay for them to work on one project until it's perfect for 6 months? Or should they have this mindset of doing quick experiments, see what sticks before investing extra time? And how can we benefit from being more flexible, and how? Like, how do we want to implement some of our principles in our day-to-day so it's not just fancy words on a document or an email, but the actual reality that the team is living and breathing? Another super important thing is feedback. You need to have bias for action. Ask what do we need to start doing or stop doing or continue doing in the next 6 months according to them, and then do that like continuously. So like I said, the engineers always know best. They are the ones on the ground doing the heavy lifting. They know the product the best. They know what they need and what they're missing. So all you have to do is ask them. I did ask those questions, and I've always had great conversations with my teams. I want to briefly mention some of the things that have come up during some of those conversations, hoping that some of it may resonate with you. But again, it can differ depending on the company and the team. So when I did ask, what basically came back was that we wanted to reduce the number of incidents and the support burden. So for example, we had a lot of issues around performance, we had a lot of bugs, and support was taking a long time and taking away time from feature development. And people were also not very motivated or happy, or very proud of the product that we were delivering. We also wanted to improve user satisfaction and feel pride in the work that we do. We were getting a lot of, I don't want to call it negative, I'll say constructive feedback, and a lot of frustration because a lot of our users felt blocked, or as if the issues they were highlighting were not always addressed fast enough. So that was another issue. And then after engineers like complain for the sake of complaining, I mean, we all do it. So it's important to double check if what they're raising is also reflected in actual data. So for example, when they mentioned to me about how time consuming support is and like all those blockers, I did do my research. I saw that we did have a lot of incidents. I saw that a lot of those issues raised by the users were not things we were catching on time. And so that kind of validated that sentiment that existed in the team. Through that, we decided to get a step that in order to get a step closer to operational excellence, we needed to be in a position to identify some inconsistencies before our users were noticing them and basically get ahead of all the problems that we were having. We also talked about past mistakes, for example, how we lacked documentation and how there was not a good enough source of truth as to how our allocation or our application should be behaving. And so the tests were not good enough, mainly because our testing coverage at that point was not great. And so we committed to finding a way to invest in those areas, including our observability. So for example, we agreed we had to increase our tests, we had to write better documentation. We also focused on cross-platform tests so that you write them once and then they're executed everywhere. For our observability, we were missing a lot of metrics. So we talked about why is it important to have those metrics and how can we make sure that what we get out of them is something that we can rely on that can then help us be biased for action and come up with some ideas as to how to improve things. We came up with a couple of initiatives. I've listed a few here as examples, but there's a lot more that goes into it. The first one was around our on-call practices and rotations. We had another one around having people be subject matter experts in the team. We also talked about allocating capacity for tech debt and technical initiatives, and we decided to set some team guidelines to ensure that we hold each other accountable. So I'll try to briefly go through each one of those things. This is a lot of text. You don't have to read through it completely. I just wanted it to exist in case anybody refers back to this presentation. But for the on-call rotation, we basically set expectations. Every engineer would be on call for a week at a time. Part of that responsibility would be to provide tier 1 support. So basically, we went through the exercise of classifying all of our apps and services to understand which ones were critical versus which ones were not. So for example, the expectation was not for somebody to be on top of every single thing and using 100% of their time, but rather focus on what was really critical. We also decided to not waste time expecting engineers to dive too deep into issues from on-call, conscious of the fact that that also takes a long time and not everybody has expertise in all domains and features. Any issues requiring domain expertise should be escalated to the right person in the team or outside the team. And that was a very quick thing we implemented to save time during on-call, but to also solve issues faster by delegating to the right people. So then we also saw a bit of, a nice effect on our end users because the resolution was happening faster by just pulling in the right people without, just saying, hey, the person on call is going to be responsible for everything, figure it out, you're on your own. Part of the responsibilities of that on-call engineer was also to ensure that PagerDuty was set up correctly, that all incidents were monitored. Same with, our pipelines and all the appropriate Slack channels. As part of the time spent on-call, we made a commitment to improve runbooks and overall documentation whenever we felt like we had time and opportunity. So that took a long time. And we also discussed all these ad hoc improvements or creating a backlog of tickets if they were to encounter an issue as opposed to neglecting it because of lack of time. So that was mainly for non-priority issues that we were creating a backlog for. For incident management, we basically decided to integrate with Incident.io. It also offers a lot of automations with Slack, especially this year. And we committed to communicating to users as well as to the teams around us better. Because believe it or not, this is such a simple hack, but communicating is everything, and we often forget that. We also established a rotation handoff meeting and written communication so everybody would be aligned as to what was happening the prior week. And also, again, some of the text you're seeing on these slides are from what we documented to set expectations and ensure that everybody was on the same page. So this slide is about how our work is structured and what we expect from the subject matter experts. or as we call them, informed captains. So we divided our work into several areas that support different parts of the business. So each area has a few engineers who really know that domain and act as the go-to people. And as informed captains, the role isn't just to do the work, but to also make sure that everything around that area is well documented and easy to understand. So things like key tables, example queries, or even like which Slack channels to use when you need help. They were the ones responsible for those things, and they had complete ownership. They also had to keep an eye on the Slack channels during business hours, but the real goal was to automate as much as possible so that people can help themselves instead of relying on somebody else to respond. Another key part of this role was like setting priorities for pipelines, deciding what's business critical versus lower priority, and making sure that our alerting and incident processes reflect that in the tools like Incident IO and PagerDuty. And when it comes to code, informed captains review pull requests from other engineers working in that area. And this helped maintain a high level of quality and consistency across teams. And it also led to us having like less bugs and less issues because there was always like a gatekeeper that had expertise in, a specific part of the code base. And finally, informed captains own the quarterly roadmap for their subject area. So they're the ones thinking about what's coming next, what improvements we can make, and how we can share learnings and best practices across teams through things like tech forums. So I was personally involving a lot of the engineers in that process alongside with my product team and trusting them to basically be thought partners to me and our PMs. We also used to have not dedicated capacity towards what we call tech debt or tech initiatives. And then we went from 0 to a minimum of 30% almost overnight, which was amazing. It was not an easy thing to sell to our product team, senior leadership, or stakeholders, but we had to make them understand why that is so important and the value it can bring to the business. We started by defining what technical debt means to us, like as the gap between the current state of the system and the ideal state that we want to get to. And in other words, it's all about the things that we know we could improve but haven't yet, often because we had to make trade-offs along the way. So that gap can come from a few different things, and that's how we explained it and fought for it. Maybe we had to make compromises because of time pressure or limited knowledge at the time, or maybe the system's requirements evolved since then. And sometimes it was just about outdated libraries or frameworks that we had to upgrade, or missing documentation. And, it got harder and harder to try and maintain all of those things over time. So to stay on top of that, we said we need at least 30% of our engineering capacity each quarter to go towards the goal of operational excellence. And that includes addressing high priority tech debt, improving reliability, and basically making the systems easier to work with in the long run. And then we did a bit of a survey across the teams as well, and we basically figured out that a lot of the pain points they were dealing with could basically create more time and space for us for feature development, and that's how we kind of solved it as well. We also made a point to rebrand this into something that can be as valued as product delivery. It shouldn't be an afterthought. It's something that we actively want to prioritize and reward, because we know that if our systems are stable or maintainable, it ultimately slows everything else down. So we saw those investments as very strategic. When there's a risk to availability or security, like we have to act straight away, like some things cannot wait. But another part of our culture was around testing. Like we've been operating in a very scrappy way because we try to keep up with everything that's happening. We experiment a lot, and we realized that we didn't have the right infrastructure in place. Like now we try to make this part of our culture, like how can we test extensively before anything goes to production to ensure that what we deliver is good enough or excellent. And we even run proactive tests when we intentionally break parts of the system. And the idea is to learn how it behaves under stress and make sure that it can recover in a more graceful way. And finally, we recognize that sometimes taking on technical debt is the right thing to do, especially when we're trying to experiment or try to move quickly in areas that we consider to be innovative. But the key is we shouldn't ignore it. We try to track it. We're transparent about it. We're not trying to hide it from our product team or anybody else. And we make sure that there's a plan to address it later in that moment, as opposed to just, going on about our day and then, that having to come back to us like a year later. We also established like team rituals and a culture in place to support us in this end goal of operational excellence. Things like planning sessions, check-ins, and also celebrations, because that is also super important. These give us a lot of structure, like a rhythm to the business. So everybody knows that when we plan, when we execute and when we pause to reflect and celebrate those wins, like nothing is done in secret. So, for example, a big one for us is quarterly planning. That's when we look at our roadmap and make sure that we're not just focused on new product work, we're also reserving a lot of time for tech health. Like I said, that 30% capacity. The engineers are like thought partners in that process. They have early visibility into what we're thinking. They have the space and time to offer their opinions and their feedback. It's not done just from within like the product team and the EMs. And beyond the ceremonies themselves, what really matters is the culture behind them. Like having like responsibility and ownership and accountability. Everybody owns a piece of the team's success, and we make sure to celebrate those contributions along the way. So yeah. Okay. So where to start? If operational excellence is something you want to achieve within your team, here are some good objectives to set for yourselves and your team. So the first one is you have to ask yourselves, like, where are we now? What types of tools or data or insights do we need to understand where we are, like in our systems, with our apps and services, in order to be able to come up with objectives that can cater to us and our unique use cases. The second one would be around defining SLAs and SLOs and SLIs. So for example, what is like the minimum acceptable threshold for your service and its availability? Also, what type of metrics are acceptable so that, what you put out there is quality enough? And also, how do you capture some of those metrics? Yeah. The third one would be around like login and monitoring. So for example, what targets do you set for yourselves? What processes you need to be able to monitor the system and use that data to provide feedback so that you can improve on those processes and those objectives. And then, of course, alerting and also how you can improve the incident response and resolution. So, for example, how can you minimize the downtime and the business impact? And how, because at the end of the day, this is also what's going to be super important for operational excellence when it comes to your users. Also maintainability, which is more about, like what type of infrastructure do you need in place when it comes to your testing, or do you need canaries maybe for some of your services, or at least the critical ones, or what type of strategy do you have around CI and CD so that the best practices are in place to be able to help your team operate at the best level possible. And lastly, how can you cultivate a culture of operational excellence? So, what type of check-ins or like meetings do you have to set up for your team? What type of feedback can you leverage? Like, do you have the right people? Do you listen to those people? And how can you foster that culture where like everybody cares and everybody wants to deliver, the best product available? And how can they help you do that? So anyway, like I said, this was going to be a quick one, so thanks. I hope I didn't speak too fast. I do that sometimes. But yeah, if you have any questions, let me know.
No, you did a fantastic job. And I really enjoyed the message you opened with quite early on, that a lot of building a good team is prioritizing what brings the most quality and value to an end product. You can't work on everything at once. You just won't have the bandwidth. And focusing on what genuinely has the most impact and brings the most high quality is really important. And I saw that message going all the way through the presentation. So thank you for just putting the spotlight on that from the get-go. We do have some questions. The first question we have is, how do you encourage innovation and perhaps even risk-taking without compromising quality of the final product?
Yeah, that's a good question. So there's a couple of things. I mean, I'm not gonna lie, I try to be sneaky sometimes. So like when I put together the roadmap in collaboration with my product team, I do try to allow a bit of extra time that we sometimes account for things like, vacations or like, I don't know, those types of things. And so when something comes up in the middle of the course and we're like, oh, we would love to like explore that a little bit more. We would love that for that to be an experiment we run. The engineers have that time and space. Another thing that I try to do is empower people to not be afraid to take risks or make mistakes. We try to time box everything. So, for example, we did invest a little bit in like how we can use AI for some of the feature development we had in the team. And then we said, hey, we're not going to spend more than a week at a time for each one of those features, because maybe if it's not working out in a week, that means that maybe we shouldn't, waste too much of our time. And then also it's about identifying these pockets of opportunity. So when my PM pitches a feature, if, for example, there's an opportunity for that to be coupled with exploring a new technology or something else like AI, like I said, I try to explain to them the trade-offs and also pitch to them the idea, hey, maybe this will take slightly longer, but maybe it's worth the end result, because then once we have that, we can use it for all these other things. And then we make that decision together. So there's a lot of different things that can happen. But honestly, at the end of the day, it's about like building those relationships in the workplace, like building that trust with your cross-functional partners and the team, and then creating that culture where like all of you know that you're on the same team with the same end goal, whether you're like in engineering or product or design or whatever. And then basically trying to come together to discuss like, okay, we know that this is what we need to do, but then how can we like be like smart and creative, and how can we innovate through those things?
That was really good. Thank you.
Yes, and I like this idea, which is also was mentioned in the presentation. This idea of giving the responsibility, but also giving this safe space to make mistakes and take new challenges as an opportunities. That definitely falls close to heart. But yeah, moving on to the next question. What role do you think recognition and feedback play in maintaining high performance?
Yeah, I mean, feedback is honestly like the most important thing that anybody can integrate into their teams. And it shouldn't be, like once a year, like some companies do through like these internal tools. And it shouldn't be at the end of a project in the form of a retro. It should be as constant as, like drinking coffee every day or tea or like brushing your teeth. It should be continuous and constant, because without feedback, positive or constructive, we don't grow. And so it's important to give feedback to all of your engineers, even like the most senior ones, whether they like it or not, because that's the only way for them to grow. It's the only way for everybody to be pushed to be better. And as a manager, I also encourage my team to give me feedback, and you kind of like set that tone, and you lead by example by doing that. And recognition is important. I mean, I know that a lot of people keep saying, oh yeah, like kudos is important, but like I don't know if people actually believe it. But I've seen the results. Like, it depends on people's personal motivations as well, and like the people you have in the team. But the more you congratulate somebody when they do something good, like first of all, it sets the tone for the rest of the team. You bring up a really good example. Like I had somebody recently who's been doing like a lot of really quick POCs using like some of the Gen AI tools for like developer, to help with like the developer experience. And he did so much, and I was like really highlighting all of his work in Slack channels and forums, like in the team, even like at stand up, because that's how I want everybody else to operate. So without bringing visibility into that, how can I expect the others to get those hints and understand like that this is how I expect them to work and behave, right? So that's why it's extremely important.
And that leads on quite, because it touches on what you mentioned in the presentation and in your answers. What do you use to create a great culture for your team so they can feel ownership and accountability? Because they get the good feedback, but how do you really reinforce that ownership and accountability for the quality?
Yeah, as an EM, I'm always extremely transparent. I know that sometimes on leadership level, you can't always tell your team everything that's happening in the background, especially when it comes to things like reorgs and, all the things that are not really good. But you know, I make a case of like, for example, the same way that they give me a stand-up update, I give them a stand-up update for myself every Friday. I'll do those like this breakdown of everything I've done in the weeks. I bring visibility into anything that I hear in like leadership forums, you know, and that helps build the trust. And without having that trust and that transparency, they're not going to trust you back. So I think that is the first step to make sure that you get to the stage that you need with your team. And then once you have that trust, you know, they want to perform well, like they want to do their part because you're doing your part. So it's about role modeling that type of behavior as well. Sorry, I kind of missed what was the question again because I think I had a couple of points.
No worries.
Um,
But yeah, thank you. I will just wrap it up there because that is all the time we have for this, and I'm keeping us on schedule. But you have been incredible. You are full of knowledge, and it has been a pleasure to have you here. And your very fun, very exciting, graphically popping presentation you brought with you.
yeah, it was all Gemini, not me. But yeah, thanks for having me. It's been super cool. Thank you.
It's been a pleasure to have you. So thank you for joining us, and we'll see you hopefully in the future.
Thank you very much, Lydia.
Thank you.